Many folks who get into business never consider what are they going to do to get out of business at some point. Welcome back to Invested in You, brought to you by Community First Investment Group. We're here to help you take the next step in your financial journey, no matter where you're starting from. I'm your host, Nate Hasto, and today's focus is Business Planning 101. Whether you're thinking about launching a business, already running one, or planning your next big transition, having a solid plan is critical, not just for success, but for sustainability. We'll walk through the basics of business financial planning, goal setting, succession planning, and how working with the right advisors can make a huge difference today. So let's start with the basics. What is business planning? It is a roadmap that outlines goals, strategies, and financial needs, as well as succession plans. Business planning isn't a one-time event, and it evolves with the business as it grows. Truly, it's probably something that needs to be done at least annually as the business continues to evolve and change. Financial planning for businesses covers more than just its operations. It connects the personal and business goals of the owners and operators. So let's start with some core elements. We have 6 main elements that are involved in business planning, and it starts with a vision. This is my personal opinion, but I believe it to be true. Ultimately, I think a business is designed to make money, but there should likely be some other form of impact that owners are trying to enact by starting a business in the first place. It takes things beyond dollars and cents. It makes doing the work even more rewarding, even when profits or margins aren't exactly where you want them to be. But impact is a super big deal when it comes to starting a business. This could be impact for the community on the services you're offering. This could be impact for your family on the legacy that you're trying to leave. This could be the flexibility that maybe business ownership offers as you get things off the ground. But defining the purpose and direction of the business is a key factor to seeing business success long term. Item number 2 here is business structure. This is really key, and probably one of the hardest pieces for folks who've never been in business before to wrap their head around. One of the most common structures for a business is called a sole prop or sole proprietorship. Effectively, this really doesn't require much in the way of paperwork to get things set up. You can get a DBA online for, last I checked, under $100 comfortably. And all DBA stands for is doing business as. This puts together a more formal legal name to go by. There really is no liability protection that exists in sole proprietorships. It is an extension of you as an individual. Even if you're running a sole prop, it's a good idea to set up a separate business bank account and keep as many of the different costs and revenue streams separate from your personal assets as possible. 1, for simplicity of tracking purposes, but 2, just to kind of maintain a legitimate business presence. And it's, again, the easiest to set up and the most common that you'll find, especially for folks that are just getting things off the ground or maybe even have a business that is perpetually going to remain a side hustle. The next type of business structure that you could select, it's kind of twofold. You could select a partnership or an LLP. This is really only needed if you have partners in business. You wouldn't set this up if you were the only person running it. In partnerships, there's typically one general partner and one limited partner. There can be more if you're using an LLP or limited liability partnership. When you look at the difference, the general partner in a partnership has the revenue treated as a pass-through entity, which just really means that the revenue of the partnership gets reported on their personal tax returns. The general partner also needs to pay self-employment taxes on the revenue from the business. It's not going to be quite the same for the limited partner in that sense. The third type of business structure you can select is something called an LLC, or limited liability corporation. The beauty in these types of structures is there is a level of protection for personal assets here. One of the biggest risks that most business owners, and especially new business owners, don't consider is that there may be the possibility they could actually get sued when it comes to running a business. It is a much more public presence. If you're doing your marketing well, people know about you. If you're becoming or you are successful in business, there's likely a bigger bank account that goes along with it. So you can become a target in some cases for folks who are looking to file a lawsuit and make out well on it. An LLC is one way that you can go through the process of actually protecting your personal assets. In the sense where the business gets sued, you still can be liable for anything that's connected directly to the business as far as business bank accounts, things of that nature. But your personal assets, assuming you're running the LLC properly, would not be at risk, which is great because you don't get into business to get sued and lose your personal assets. I've never met anyone who's gotten into business for that reason. This is still a pass-through entity, which means profits and losses are going to be reported on your personal tax return. Now, I'll preface all of this. None of this is tax advice. This is simply facts about business structures. But this is a common question that we get. We mentioned self-employment taxes with the partnership structure, and those are present with an LLC as well. One of the main questions we get is, what are self-employment taxes? And for folks who have been employed for their entire lives or careers, it can seem kind of confusing because it sounds like you're getting taxed more to run a business. And to an extent, that's true. And it's simply because you're shouldering more of the tax burden. So for instance, self-employment taxes can also be referred to as payroll taxes when you're operating as a W-2 employee. If you look on your pay stub, you'll see something called OASDI, which stands for Old Age Survivors Disability Insurance. This is 15.3%. That's what it's being taxed at. That includes 12.4% for Social Security. If you're employed, you as the employee are covering half of that, 6.2%. Your employer is covering the other portion of that, 6.2%. And then there's Medicare taxes that go into the equation as well. However, when you are self-employed, you're operating as both the employee and the employer. So you're responsible for all of that. So when people say self-employment taxes, that's what they're referring to. And that's one of the reasons why oftentimes people who are getting into business for the first time or setting up these structures, even if they're thinking ahead about setting money aside for taxes, sometimes they undershoot what they actually need to have set aside in order to make sure that taxes are covered. The fourth type of business structure, and this is kind of an umbrella, these are corporations, and there's something called C Corps and S Corps, and we'll go in order. So C Corps are probably the most costly to set up. They require the greatest amount of structure and documentation. Record keeping is a requirement here, but they do offer the greatest level of protection for personal assets. If you are setting up a business with the intention of being able to go public at some point and seek investors, especially a large number of investors, a C Corp is probably the right type of business structure for you to consider. Most companies don't start out as C Corps. I'll put that out there as well. But this is something that you want to spend time working with, business attorney, probably a CPA as well. Financial advisors don't typically get into giving advice on which type of structure an individual should use, but we have an understanding of what each type might look like and what some of the pros and cons may end up being there. Last is S Corp. This does allow for profits and some losses to be flowed through to the owner's individual personal tax return. It does avoid the double taxation as well that corporations have to deal with. And when I say double taxation, I'm simply referring to the corporation gets taxed on profits, and then the owner would get taxed on income that's being received from the business as well. So that's where the double taxation is happening with C Corps. That does not happen with S Corps. You do need to file with the IRS to get S Corps started up and get the proper status. There are a slew of different filters you need to be able to kind of pass through in order to actually qualify to be an S Corp. Just for example, one of those is you can have no more than 100 shareholders. So we're not talking about a publicly held company in most cases here. And you're also talking about none of those shareholders can be international. citizens. So a lot to cover there with business structure. Our third core element is more of a financial planning aspect, which might be a little bit of a misnomer on the titling. This can include things like budgeting, forecasting, figuring out ways to access capital. At the end of the day, even though we would title this financial planning, it's not really something that a financial advisor is going to spend a ton of time working on with a business owner. And it's not that we're disinterested, it's just that that's not really our lane when it comes to the line of finance that we're in. A CFO, a fractional CFO, a CPA, or a bookkeeping firm are probably more well suited for handling this type of a solution for a business owner. Now, financial advisors do love to partner and have communication with those parties to make sure we understand how things are flowing for the business, what opportunities might exist, what years are a little healthier, what years are a little more lean. That does help us to create some strategies with the business owner on that side, but truly we're not the ones entering or finagling the numbers on that side. The fourth piece here is risk management. Again, this is something that a bit of this gets offloaded to different financial professionals, but insurance needs, contingency planning are some for instances. Business insurance professionals can help quite a bit with the insurance needs side of things to make sure the business is properly insured. There are so many different lines of business insurance nowadays that I won't claim to know exactly what all of them are, but it's something you want to work with a well-versed business insurance professional to handle. Where financial advisors may be able to assist is some of the contingency planning. Now this comes to a little bit of the exit strategy that goes along with this as well, so we'll touch more on that in the future, but things like buy-sell agreements, business overhead insurance, identifying who maybe internally or externally might be a part of a transition plan at some point in the future, especially if the business has been very successful and is going to likely be around for quite a while. That's ideal. Getting into point 5, we bled this together a little bit here, but point 5 is succession planning and exit planning. There is a quote that I really love when it comes to the whole planning process, whether it's for business owners or individuals, but it's from Stephen Covey. It's just about beginning with the end in mind. Often when we're spending time sitting with people who are asking for advice, we can't tell people where they're trying to go, but we also can't understand where they're starting from if they aren't willing to open up and share some details and put things in context for us. So beginning with the end in mind is great, but it takes collaboration from both sides. Step 1 is we need to understand where people are starting from, and step 2 is we need to understand ultimately where they're trying to go, because if we don't have either of those points of reference, we really can't give good instruction or guidance or direction. So beginning with the end in mind, I think, is a challenge for most business owners, because you get very, very excited about getting into business and seeing it grow and the opportunities and maybe the money that can be earned to go along with it. Many folks who get into business never consider what are they going to do to get out of business at some point. It's a very common thought for people who work a regular job to think, I'm going to work until 65, 67, maybe 70, and then I'm going to retire. I'm just going to walk away. Well, business owners in many cases may not feel like they have that luxury to just walk away, depending on what type of product or service they're offering. But also, they probably have put in more hours than the average W-2 employee as well. So they've poured more blood, sweat, and tears into the business. They may have personal relationships with a lot of the folks that they work with, both internally and externally. They may be providing jobs for people and feel responsible to them in that way. So walking away and just retiring maybe isn't quite as flashy of a aspiration when it comes to business ownership as it is with a regular W-2 job. So thinking about how this is going to transition is a big deal. Maybe not a fun thing to think about as far as all of the complexities there, but something that every business owner should be thinking about, even in the beginning. So when a owner is beginning to plan for transitions, which I would recommend considering at the beginning of the business, it's really helpful to understand if the goal is to sell the business at some point, if the goal is to create family legacy, maybe pass that down to a sibling or a child or something like that, or if bringing in partners is the right move long term. Now, you won't know in the beginning exactly what the right move is going to be, but I think beginning that thought exercise of understanding how your ideal exit might look really can make a big difference in how you manage the business to begin with. Probably the biggest mistake that I see people make when it comes to business ownership is the owners make themselves irreplaceable in the business. And the truth is, with a business, what you're ultimately trying to do is you're trying to potentially create some sort of impact, right? If that's part of your goals with your vision and mission. But you're trying to create a entity, a machine that produces profit. But if that profit is dependent on you being present and active in the business, it is not an attractive asset for someone else to be able to purchase. So while you may want to be very, very picky in who you sell the business to, and I can completely understand that, for most people it almost becomes like another child. It's really important to figure out ways to document and systems to create and ways to empower people, if you're in a business that employs people, to be successful, even without you literally being present. And that helps quite a bit when it comes to the exit portion of this. The sixth point and core element is personal financial integration. Now, this is heavily financial planning and working with a financial advisor, but this comes down to ensuring that the business supports the owner's long-term personal financial goals. Now, again, not every business owner gets into business to become wealthy. However, it is still one of the most tried and true paths to first generation wealth in this country, and it's one of the beauties of capitalism. So when we talked about beginning with the end in mind, a lot of the exit aspects of things may not be, I want to get the absolute top dollar for my business no matter what. It may not be, I want to work until I can't physically work anymore. It may not necessarily be, I need to work until one of my kids is old enough to take over the business. But ultimately, you're just trying to understand how much is enough to truly achieve what you want to be doing personally. And that's where a lot of the financial planning and kind of working backwards can kind of come into play. Transitioning here into some common business planning mistakes. We've talked a little bit about some of these already. We've mentioned not planning for emergencies or becoming too irreplaceable in your own business. Many business owners ignore succession planning completely, and they wait too long. There is a sweet spot in business ownership where you have the ability to work longer, but maybe would be interested in exiting. And I always just bring this back to, you want to find a spot where you have as much leverage as possible. And it's not to say that you're trying to squeeze every single dollar out of the business. It's not about greed, but it is about being in a spot where you have some flexibility, because sometimes plans fall through, sometimes people back out of deals. And if you're in a position where you can't walk away from the table because you can't physically, mentally, emotionally manage the business any longer, you're not putting yourself in a position to maybe hit those goals that you had personally. The third is not separating business and personal finances properly. We've talked briefly about some of these different business structures that can allow for separation and protection from lawsuits of personal assets. Those only work if you operate them properly. Commingling funds between your business and your personal accounts is a surefire way to create a target for lawsuits and really come out in the end in a bad way. So discussing that with a CPA, discussing that with a business attorney are great steps to take to make sure that you truly understand, based on what type of business you're operating, what protections exist, and how to make sure that you're doing the practices in the right way to actually protect yourself. And the last one is growing too fast without any financial cushion. For the most part, growth at all costs is probably not the right strategy for everyone. Doubling down after doubling down after doubling down can work. It's unlikely that you have only successes and no failures in business, though. So operating in a conservative way, at least financially, if you're not going to operate that way in business, is ideal. It creates some backstops for you to make sure that one mistake doesn't send you completely out of business. When it comes to how we as financial advisors support business owners, we've talked a little bit about this already, but we spend some time working with other professionals when it comes to a business owner's planning team. We've mentioned these already, but business attorneys and CPAs are key when it comes to this. Sometimes estate planning attorneys come into the equation as well if we're talking about business transition plans. We help align personal and business goals. That really is the financial planning aspect or the big picture of why someone's getting into business and how we can kind of reverse engineer what goals they may need to hit in order to reach their personal goals. Working with businesses on employee retention and succession planning. Now, employee retention could look like setting up a benefits package and doing reviews of maybe supplemental insurance, maybe retirement plans that are available for a business owner to be leveraging to keep and retain their people. Sometimes that can be a good opportunity for a business owner as well to create another avenue of retirement security for themselves, not just the sale of the business. Customizing those benefits is something that's an option as well. Many people think that retirement plans are all the same. There's so much customization that can come into play there that spending some time understanding who the employees are, what ultimately they want, can make a big difference. And then exit planning, again, this is something that's working in conjunction with all three parties. So you've got the CPAs, the attorneys, and the advisors that really are a key aspect of figuring out the most effective way based on whatever options are truly available for a business owner to exit. To wrap up our session for today, we do have a Q&A from a listener today. The question is, I run a side hustle selling handmade accessories and clothing online. At what point should I officially register my business, and what's the best way to get started? Now, there's a little context, but not a lot here. So I have some general thoughts to share on this. However, they can't be true full recommendations at this point without knowing the full scenario. But number one, I would really get a handle on income and then the level of risk that's actually being taken on with whatever this business is, right? So if you think about we're selling clothing online, the risk of selling clothing online is probably rather small. Now, I could be wrong. I'm not an attorney here, but I can't imagine too many ways that clothing would prompt a lawsuit here. So probably not an absolute need right up front to have all of the legal protections of something like an LLC. But having extra protection and not needing it is better than not having it and needing it. So that could be something to consider. Making sure that there is a separate business bank account, I would say, would be key up front. Even if you're operating as a sole proprietorship right now, having a clear, defined line between personal and business operations is helpful, especially since you're going to be claiming either profits or losses on your own taxes this way. It's easier to be able to itemize and say, I produced $10,000 of revenue, but $2,000 of it was profit because I spent $8,000 on these business products and services that were needed in order to market, sell, ship, etc. The tracking of expenses is probably business owners' least favorite thing to do when it comes to business, especially a creative business like this. Now, I'm projecting, I don't know that that's the case, but it does seem to be a trend. So at least on a monthly basis, I would recommend spending some time going through your business bank account, reviewing what you're spending versus what you're earning. One, that's great for you to just know where you're at on a month-to-month basis, but it's also going to create much smaller bites for getting all of that recorded properly by the end of the year. I want to thank everyone for joining us on this episode of Invested in You, brought to you by Community First Investment Group. Here for your now, here for your future. If you found today's episode helpful, share it with a friend or colleague who's been working toward their business goals as well. Be sure to check us out on Facebook and LinkedIn if you're ready to put a business financial plan in place or take yours to the next level. Our team is ready to help. Visit cfigadvisors.com to get started, and we'll see you on the next episode of Invested in You, Investing Myths Debunked. The Opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. Securities and advisory services are offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor and broker-dealer, member FINRA SIPC. Insurance products are offered through LPL or its licensed affiliates. Community First Bank and Community First Investment Group are not registered as a broker-dealer or investment advisor. Registered representatives of LPL offer products and services using Community First Investment Group and may also be employees of Community First Bank. These products and services are being offered through LPL or its affiliates, which are separate entities from and not affiliates of Community First Bank or Community First Investment Group. Securities and insurance offered through LPL or its affiliates are not FDIC insured by FDIC or any other government agency, not bank guaranteed, not bank deposits or obligations, may lose value. There is no assurance that techniques and strategies discussed are suitable for all investors or will yield positive outcomes. The purchase of certain securities may be required to affect some of these strategies. Investments involve risk, include possible loss of principal. Individual tax and legal matters should be discussed with your tax or legal professional. Economic forecasts set forth may not develop as predicted, and there can be no guarantee that strategies promoted will be successful. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested in directly.